So we would love to get this wonderful, exciting breakfast to begin. We are very fortunate to have so many of you here, and we're delighted to welcome you. My name is Ross Sandler. I'm professor of law at New York Law School and the director of the Center for New York City Law. And one of the publications we provide is City Law, which is on desks there, and as a special treat, we're offering half-price subscriptions to new subscribers today, so this is your moment. I welcome everybody to New York Law School. We are very proud of this law school and very proud of the City Law Breakfast. This is the 113th City Law Breakfast. It began in 1994. It's a catalog of important statements by people who have held positions in the city government, and we're delighted today to have this extraordinary breakfast. I'm going to turn the microphone over for the introductions to our wonderful new dean, Anthony Crowell.
Thank you, Ross, and welcome, everyone. This is really wonderful. This is one of our largest breakfasts, and I think one that is fitting. It's great to start with the borough presidents as we look to welcome all of our new city elected officials, and it's great to have them here at New York Law School, which we call New York's Law School. And I like to think of this building as one of New York City's community centers, but certainly city government's community center because of where we're located. I want to warmly welcome our distinguished panel. We have Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, and it seems like Borough President Adams and I are together virtually every, this is the third time in 1 week, so last night at the conservatory. Also, Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. Staten Island Borough President and one of our alums here at New York Law School, James Otto. And unfortunately, Melinda Katz couldn't join us today, but we have Deputy Borough President Leroy Comrie, who is an old friend. And I want to just recognize from the Queensborough President's Office, Alyssa Velasquez, who is an alum of this school also, and she's the new general counsel there. I had the great honor to work with many of those who are now borough presidents in my former role as City Hall counsel, and it's really exciting to see what is on the horizon. The borough presidency is something that I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for, and I think it's an office that sometimes is misunderstood, and the opportunities that it presents is something that's quite extraordinary. We have to recognize that they're the top ambassadors for the borough, and they work on and advocate, I like to call them borough advocates also, really critical issues affecting land use, and issues of really trying to tether together so many different communities and helping to serve as a guide for coordinating borough delegations. So really immense power and in terms of pulling everything together, and I think with this new term that we're seeing, a lot of promise and excitement. The office allows for wide-ranging issues, and the focus on Hurricane Sandy recovery, day-to-day quality of life issues really gives a sense of urgency to community needs and brings them forth to the central government. I'd like to make a couple of acknowledgments before I turn the floor over to Errol Lewis, who is someone we all know from reading his reporting and watching him as host of the only show that focused exclusively on local politics inside City Hall on New York One. But I want to acknowledge our sponsors, special breakfast guest sponsor Davidoff, Hutcher, and Citron, and its senior partner Sid Davidoff. Sid is someone, as many of you know, who's as knowledgeable as anyone about the workings of city government and the important roles that the borough presidents play. And with that, I also want to acknowledge Con Edison, Greenberg Trade, and Verizon as longstanding supporters of the Center for New York City Law in these breakfasts. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Errol, and I know that he will lead us through a very engaging and robust discussion today. Errol?
Thank you. Thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. So, folks, this is a group of lawyers. This is a group of people who are interested in policy. My first question, and we'll start with Gail Brewer, not to put her on the spot, but because I think she's probably thought about the answer to the following question more than all of us. What specific changes, perhaps to the charter, perhaps to city or state law, do you think would enhance the powers of the borough presidency in a way that would enable you to do your job better?
First of all, it's great to be here with Errol Lewis. If anybody's from Verizon, I'm sorry, but the reason we keep Time Warner is because of Errol Lewis.
Thank you.
The couple of things about the charter that I think would enhance the borough president's offices. The land use decision-making is important. It's part of an important pipeline, but it is not statutory. It is not something that, it's advisory. And I think the borough president's office in the role of land use plays a very critical role because obviously the project is certified with the city planning commission. It goes to the amazing community board members, and there's some here, and then to the city council with city planning in between. But we bring the parties together. And I know that because I was a council member for 12 years. I worked with our then borough president, and he did bring the parties together, and I will do the same. But it is very advisory. So I would love to see the charter make the borough presidents more of a mandatory stop so that what we recommend has much more weight. Currently, it is all on the city council and the mayor in the end, and I think the fact that we have the ability to bring people together would make a difference. I think the second issue is we have a lot of appointments. We have them to the certainly pension and to some of the education, and we certainly have it to the franchise. Franchise is another place where I'd love to see more power. The mayor controls the franchise, but that is ironically where Time Warner and Verizon and other franchises are make a difference in the city of New York one way or the other. So I'd love to see more power given to the borough presidents in that role. And now finally, the borough presidents as a whole could be, in this planning role, have, and again, I don't know how to articulate it specifically, but we are now faced with not just development, but how do we do major plans for our boroughs, and working with the City Planning Commission. We obviously have appointments to the City Planning Commission. We work with them, but I think to give that more teeth would be something that the borough presidents could do. So those are just some examples. I'm going to focus on the planning and development because that's where the role is most appropriate, I think, for the borough presidents.
And so Ruben Diaz, as the person on stage who has served in the role longer than anyone else here, did you find different constraints along the lines of what Gail Brewer just mentioned? Did you find yourself at certain points saying, man, I wish I had just a little more authority in this particular negotiation or this particular planning process?
Absolutely. And you got to take notice that we, as borough presidents, we're the only ones in the city of New York that are elected by our entire boroughs. We represent the entire borough. And so to have, the city council or the administration tell us and not have that direct say-so on the ULURP process, not have that direct vote, so it's advisory. I agree with Gail with that. Even though in the Bronx, for instance, we have relationships with all of the city council delegation, we exercise those relationships and in the first Kingsbridge Armory project. So that worked in our favor, but absolutely I would love to see for the borough presidents to have more of a mandate and a statutory role on the ULURP process. The fact that we have 1/5 of a vote in the NYSERS board is something that I would like to see changed, the NYSERS being the New York City Retirement Pension System. I would like to see the day where we have our own budgets, where we don't have to go and just rely on the city council speaker, or the administration. Again, because we get elected from the people of our boroughs. And of course, there's things like in the budget process. One of the things that I find very frustrating, at least in the last administration, is when we assign Reso 8 money or capital funds to a project, Well, we assign it, and we get elected. The city council gets elected. They'll vote on that budget. The mayor gets elected. He'll vote on that budget. But then we saw OMB, for instance, tell us what we can and cannot do with the money that we assign, that all elected officials in 3 stages approved. So that's something that I would like to see examined as well. And also, to be quite honest, I would like for there to be more of a conversation with the administration on the selection of our borough commanders or borough commissioners with the different agencies.
And now, Eric Adams, when you decided to run for borough president, you were a fairly senior member of the team in what was at the time, at least, the majority conference in the state senate. A fair amount of power, not term limited, with the promise of more influence ahead. You saw something in this office that would enable you to do certain things that you couldn't do in that other already sort of formidable position. What do you see here as a possibility for the borough presidency?
Well, 2 things. One, I'm happy the Deputy Borough President Leroy Comrie is here, because if you were to do a close examination of all of our offices, you'll see that we have a strong bench. Diana Reyna is my deputy. Leroy Comrie is the deputy for Queens, and if you look at Gail's and Ruben's deputy, you see that we have competent people who are at the next level as well. I believe that the key is several things. You would never meet an elected official who wouldn't want more power. The name of the game is to look at what you have and make lemonade out of the limits that you have. So I'm excited about the power I have. Of course, I would like to have more, but I'm going to do the best I can in the borough of Brooklyn with what I have. And I'm going to leverage the things that I have in the city charter to make sure that the other branches of government understands the power of the borough president, and using the advocacy position that we have. And that's what I thought was important. When you look at a borough like New York, like Brooklyn, 2.5 million people, and probably another 600,000 is hiding from the census takers because they think it's the bill collector. The reality is that we could come together, and you're going to see what's different from the previous administrations is that we are all on the same page. And we met already in the Bronx, and we're going to continue to meet to push our agenda as borough presidents. And so I think Ruben was right. Having that on-the-ground input in who's the borough commander, how the planning board is operating correctly, how the Department of Building is moving in the right direction. How do we become a business-friendly borough so we don't continue taxation through citation? How do we make sure that our businesses are able to grow in the borough? And so I saw that as a possibility that you couldn't do in the northern part of the state in Albany. I want to be on Albany Avenue in Brooklyn to make sure that that stretch of real estate become a prominent place to be.
Now, one of the interesting possibilities is because the powers of the office are somewhat scattered. The holder of the office can shape it to his or her preference. And Leroy Comrie, I mean, I remember you told me that your boss's predecessor, Helen Marshall, specialized in libraries, not because the office demanded it, or because it was a particularly good fit. It was just something that she wanted to do. In some ways, that's an advantage, isn't it? I mean, the Queens libraries have some of the busiest libraries in the whole of North America.
Yes, the Queens Library System has been, over the past few years, the busiest library system in the entire country, almost in every urban country, in, not just America, but also in looking at other countries as well. The Queens Library System is utilized at a higher level than most major cities, even with the least hours of any library system in the city. And we've been able to document that. And it's interesting. Before I start, I have to say good morning to everyone. I want to apologize profusely that Borough President Katz is not here, but Melinda Katz had made a long-term commitment to the district attorney's office for an event that they were having this morning to be the keynote person there. The district attorney was very sweet to her before she got elected and housed her transition team. And Eliza Velasquez, who was here, stand up again, Eliza. They didn't see you. She's she's a great general counsel and has joined the team with myself. I'm honored that Melinda asked me to be her deputy. It's interesting that you mention the libraries because there was just a library hearing regarding and some issue with Tom Galante, who is the director of the library. But we are looking forward to continuing to expand the use of libraries because at the end of the day, our communities, our citizens, our elderly, our young people need libraries. I was fortunate to build a library in my community in an underserved area. We have a lot of children that use libraries as after-school programs, seniors that need libraries to learn about things, new immigrants that come to the libraries to ensure that they have opportunity for jobs, for ESL, for almost everything. So, you know, we have to have a library system that's really open to our communities 24/7. And that brings me to one of the points that I wanted to talk about. There's a real disparity that needs to be changed for the borough presidents because the amount of funding per capita has been skewed by OMB for many years. And that's something that we need to have changed as well. The per capita funding that we have for the borough does not match what our actual needs are from OMB. And because of that, our library funding has been actually underfunded for the last few years, and our cultural funding as well. And for Queens to have 2 airports, to have all of the development that we have, and only have 2% of the overall tourism dollars is a joke. And that's something that must be changed. And hopefully we can get the city council to change it, but we're already looking at doing some things on the state level to ask for some changes as well. We are now forced to look at the library board of trustees because of what's happening in the library, and we're going to be going to the state to ask them to look at the issue of the trustees for the library as well, because we need to make sure that a system that is so important is as transparent as possible to keep people's faith in it.
And Borough President Otto, you showed me around some of the hardest hit areas after the hurricane, and that was a year ago, but I can't quite believe that things are at a point where this is not your major preoccupation, so that whatever the borough president was supposed to do, you've got a pretty big item sitting in your inbox, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my top priority. Just let me begin by saying good morning to everyone and saying to Errol that, you know, I'm going to try to answer all your questions, but before you ask me a really difficult one, I just want to remind you, I saw a balcony outside coming on the way in.
We don't back down. We're not scared of balconies.
The morning after Sandy hit, a Tuesday morning, one of my mentors, my predecessor, Jim Molinaro, and I jumped in a car and we went down Father Capodanno Boulevard. And the images I saw of my home community, I thought were reserved to a movie screen or, you know, a news show depicting Kansas after a twister. And it has been an extremely difficult 15, 16 months. These are complex issues, and I don't make any excuses for government. We could have done a better job, and even if we had done a better job, it is still a very difficult thing. You don't have one level of government or 2 levels of government. You have 3 levels of government, and that creates delay. So I have constituents that I've represented for 15 years who are either not in their homes or still don't know which direction their lives are going. And to me, this is my top priority. And it's also, through this tragedy, a loss of 20-some-odd people in Staten Island, through this tragedy, there is an opportunity to create better communities, to create a different housing stock. Many of these communities were bungalow communities. My parents, who came from Brooklyn, used to come to Staten Island to be in, for the summer, to be in some of the bungalows. Eventually, they became permanent communities, and it was just ad hoc. And people just added on, and they were not, those buildings were not ready for that wave. we have a chance to take these communities, to put in the proper infrastructure, and to create a different housing stock. Now, the pressure I have felt, quite frankly, over the last 16 months comes from the extremes. On one extreme, there were people who would have come in and built, Miami Beach-style townhouses and would have priced out everyone who was a Midland Beach resident or a lifelong resident of Ocean Breeze. On the other side, I've seen people descend in my community that were never there with me, were never there with my predecessor, John Fusco, when we would fight to reclaim these communities. They wrap themselves in this self-righteous cloak, and they want to solve the city's homeless problem in these communities. Somewhere in between is the working class people who made that community, who have a right to live there and a right to live in a better housing stock. And getting to where we need to be has been extremely difficult. It was difficult. Everything that could go wrong with the storm, the wave, the moon, the high tide, the wind shift, the timing of it at the end of a borough president and mayoral administration has made this a really, really difficult challenge. It's a challenge that we'll be working on throughout the first term, and if there is a second one, probably throughout that one as well.
So a question for everyone. You've got two sides to your, well, you've got different parts of your office, but the one that might consume most of your time involves managing the community boards, right? They can be fractious, they can be angry, they can frustrate the plans that perhaps you and other planners want to guide the borough through. How do you manage that? What's the future of the community boards? I mean, I know you've all done more than your share of time at these meetings.
Well, the way we've been able to manage it, and I think we're doing pretty good in the Bronx, is we work together with the community boards. We let them know that they are, in essence, an extension of the borough president's office. We allow for them to come to Borough Hall, use whatever assistance, either the technology or staff. We give them the technical assistance. And whenever developers come, or whenever there's a project or we send them to the community boards first. We make sure that they have that level of input. Again, for those of you who may not be aware, in the Bronx, we're a borough of 1.4 million. 40% of the people who live in the Bronx were born in another country. And one of the things that we make sure in our community boards is that diversity is well represented. And not just from the standpoint of race or the ethnicity, but also from the geography within the community board. One of the things that we see that we saw is when you map out the community board, and in my office they give me the little dots of where all of the members are from. If there's too many members from the northern part of that community board district, we try to balance that out. We try to balance it out with regards to gender. We have more LGBT representation in our community boards. We have more the immigrant population. We try to do that with professionals. So if we see that a community board does not have, for instance, an attorney or someone who is well versed on economic development or a teacher on educational issues, we take that into consideration as we make our appointments.
I was on my community board for 10 years, and I am a big supporter. Some people like going to parties. I love going to community board meetings. But I know that's sick, Jimmy Otto. But I will say two things. One is we're going to try to develop capacity. The way we're doing that is we already had a meeting with, and many people from the law school are aware of the amazing work that this law school does on technology, but it is my background, and so we brought in 10 or 15 people who work on open data, bills that I passed that need to be comprehended locally, and they will do mapping and work with the boards in Manhattan to literally do the maps. We've had this horrible spat of fatalities, which we are all aware of. They've existed in other boroughs, but we've had a lot of them in Manhattan. So we will work on the hot spots and be able to work with the community boards to be able to say, we don't want this to happen. This is where it could happen. These are the layers. So those of you who know technology, how to layer a map. And the boards need that kind of support. The second issue is I've always, like my colleagues, believed that the schools need to have more community board relationship. And in some cases, the community boards have a member on the school leadership team, for instance. Or how do we make sure the two are working together? Because the schools and the community boards have never had close relationship. And I think the third thing is to figure out how to give, obviously, the broad depth of appointments. We've had, in some cases, 73 appointments. We just finished the round due date of February 1st, and some of these boards are getting 73 or 80 requests, and that's a good thing. And so the question is how to also, with all of this excitement, do early planning on the land use. Don't wait for city planning to come around and say, oh, we certified the project. We want to have a planning process that starts now for a project that we know is going to be taking place in the future. And we do know that. We know when these things are going to be taking place. So those are just some examples where I think we can build capacity and hopefully do the planning that the community planning boards, that's what they used to be called, are supposed to do.
You know that Melinda Katz was the land use chair for the city council, and I succeeded her as land use chair. We're going to be working with the community boards to give them early planning on that. We're going to actually assign staff to be at the community board that will be in the proper discipline or area of concern at each monthly meeting. We've already brought in community board members to help them with their internal issues, because we've had a couple of community boards with internal issues. We actually Borough President Katz hired a community board manager to do constituent services, because we're going to take constituent services in response to a new level in the borough president's office, and also she's going to coordinate with all the community boards, because a lot of people call their community boards before they call 311 on issues still, and dealing with constituent complaints and issues with city government has been the stalwart of the community board, but they've been underfunded. They haven't had a raise in 12 years, and when we were in the city council, we fought just to try to keep them whole, but they're behind in technology. A lot of community board offices have computers that are 2 centuries old. You know, they're not connected, they don't have bandwidth, they don't have computers. A lot of them are still running Windows 98. So we need to get them more money. They need to get technology upgrades. We're working to, as Gail said, to get more people to be involved in the community boards, but there are a lot that we're going to be doing to ensure that there's more community board participation on a local level.
Of the 5 of us, this is probably the least challenging for me, in that I only have 3 community boards and I only have 3 council members that I have to deal with. And I'm friendly with each of them. Debbie Rose and I were colleagues in the council, and actually we sat down for a good 2.5 hours early on in the year to make sure that we really solidify our relationship. Vinny Ignizio, Councilmember Ignizio, is one of my best friends, and the Mid-Island councilman was my chief of staff. So there's an ability for and I will remind him of that should there be an issue with the community board. But so there's a really good relationship. But to me, there's a bigger issue here. And as a Staten Islander, I've seen Joe Cusick and some of my friends from Staten Island, there's a level of apathy in our borough. It's very difficult to engage people. Some people think their civic duty is to rant anonymously on SI Live or to post on their Facebook page out of the comfort of their living room. And to get them involved, to get them out, Guy Molinari once got 10,000 people out at New York High School to rage against the Verrazano Bridge toll. We couldn't get 10,000 people out over a series of years, cumulatively. And one of the things I've tried to say, and I have to be very careful in how I say it because I certainly don't want to be insulting to anyone, there's a rubber chicken dinner circuit that I think all the borough presidents go on. And we see a lot of the same stakeholders. And I don't want to disrespect them because those are the people who show up and those are the people who want to be involved in their community. One of my challenges on Staten Island is to get to the other 499,000 people. And one of the ways we're trying to do, and this will bring a smile to Gail Brewer's face, is through technology and social media. And one of the things we did, just as a very specific example, there's something called the New York City Transit Riders Council, something or other, that frankly I didn't even know existed, but we as borough presidents get a chance to appoint. The Staten Island appointee was appointed in 1994. It was a former employee of then borough president Molinari. He's still on. We just opened it up to the public. We put it on Facebook and said, hey, if you're interested, come on down, instead of kind of filling it from our own insular inner circle. And we're going to try to do the same thing with the community boards, try to open it up to the general public in Staten Island, because I think the more we engage Staten Islanders, the more they see that, frankly, we try to do things differently, the more that they will it's more likely they'll lose that cynicism, become engaged, maybe become engaged in their local civic associations, and I think that ultimately is in the best interest of the borough.
And I agree, and I think Borough President Otto was correct. And what I believe we must marry technology, but also we need to expect more. And I know we have some of my community board people who are here. I saw 7, 10, I think 14, 6. There's a couple of board members who are here. One of the first things I did, Errol, when I came into office and I brought my entire staff into the room, I told them all, don't get comfortable with your offices, your cubicles. The game of being in this beautiful, pristine building is over. People are hurting on the street. I don't need experts to sit in the room. I need for my team to go out and meet people on the ground. And that's the same thing I'm expecting of the community board members. You know, when I started 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, it was a prerequisite that all members had to volunteer 20 hours a week. If you are my community board, I want you to go out and do volunteerism. I have 18 community boards, 50 people per community board. Sometimes the city council members get it mixed up. They believe they appoint. No, they recommend I appoint. So there is a requirement I'm expecting of everyone who serves. You know, how are you volunteering? How are you giving back? How are you going to be part of this CompStat machinery that I'm going to create, where we're going to map where the pain is and go apply human services to the pain and bring people from where they are to where we are to where they ought to be. And you can't do that, as Otto stated, you can't do that by merely blogging. People have moved away from human engagement and believe they can sit under their covers, peek their heads out every week, and then do a blog somewhere. No, you must get in the game. You must be in the community. We have a double-digit unemployment in many of my communities. Community board members can help me with resume writing, job preparation. How do you get people back to employment? 24% of my borough is living in poverty. We must do more to really bring people out of a poverty environment. And the community board is an army of bright, intelligent, dedicated people. Now we have to engage them in a real way of how do they deal with some of the issues that are impacting all of our boroughs. When you look at the Bronx, 30% people living in poverty. You look at Staten Island and other boroughs. Although you can add the 1.4 of the Bronx, a couple of 100,000 in Staten Island, Brooklyn is 2.5 million people who are dealing with some real issues, and the community board can help alleviate some of that pain.
Okay, I'm going to ask a last question before we start inviting the members of the audience to ask their questions. And I'd like each of you to talk about a project, something that's in your office or on deck for your office to tackle that you think is surprisingly undercovered, that maybe the rest of the city and the media doesn't know about. Tell us what it is and give us the inside scoop.
The Bronx. Man, I'm tired of the media not covering what the good things that are happening in the Bronx. We have been so fortunate working with community board members, working with developers, many of who are here today, working with community activists. I want to take my time here for a minute. You guys should understand that in the Bronx, in the last 4 years alone, we've done over $700 million in housing, all kind of housing. We've done housing for low income. We've done a mixed income. We've done home ownership, co-ops, housing for senior citizens, housing for grandparents who are the sole custodians of their grandkids. We've done housing for vets. And all of it, you want to talk about policy? All of it under my office has been done with some type of LEED certification. We're leading the city in that, in new builds. In other words, if you want my assistance, if you want the assistance of the community board, you have to build green in the Bronx. No one is really talking about that. If you look at projects like Villa Verde is the national paradigm for green build. And that's right in the footprint of where the Bronx was burning. We have everything from the Carrie Leeds Tennis Center in Crotona Park, $23 million public-private partnership. Even Tommy Hilfiger put some money into that. We have done the redevelopment. We're doing the redevelopment of the Kingsbridge Armory. Many of you have heard about that. It's going to be the largest ice center in the country. 9 rinks. with 50,000 community space, with community input. By the way, the community board had a lot to do with that CBA and had input in it, so that the community could have other amenities that have nothing to do with ICE. We've seen about $240 million in the last 5 years in public park restoration funds. So our parks look beautiful and pristine. We have crime reduction at an all-time, and that's happening throughout the city. But let me tell you something about the Bronx. In 2012, it was our banner year in crime reduction. It was the safest the Bronx has been since 1963. 2013, we shattered those numbers. Homicide in the Bronx in 2012 was 113 in the Bronx. Last year was 84. While reduction was down throughout the whole city of New York, we were responsible for 37% of the reduction in homicides in all of New York City. No one is talking about that. No one is talking about, I mean, when you look at restaurants, you know, if you're an Epicurean, you need to examine the Bronx now, and not just go to Arthur Avenue, which Arthur Avenue is good. Go to City Island, go to East Tremont. There's a huge diversity in cuisine in our borough. Our waterfronts, the way we've been developing the waterfront, so we have waterfront districts. We have the largest mall in the Bronx, in the city, being built in the Bronx right now, in Bay Plaza. When it's all said and done, we'll have 1.2 million square feet of retail. We'll be beating out Queens. No offense, Leroy. And then, of course, one of the things that we've been doing is improving on our transportation infrastructure. So we've been trying, and finally we got the governor to agree in his State of the State address. He committed to the 4 Metro North stations that we're going to continue to make sure over this legislative session up in Albany in the MTA 5-year capital plan that is funded. So we need 4 Metro North stations in the eastern corridor of the Bronx, 1 in Hunts Point, 1 in Parkchester, 1 in Morris Park, 1 in Co-op City. That's transformative. If you study the history of this nation, you have to see what the rail system has done for municipalities. If we upgrade, if we upzone those surrounding areas, could you imagine? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to rebrand the borough, trying to reimagine the borough. And then lastly, I just want to say this, that, you know, there's so many different individuals like Donald Trump who put his name, his money, and his brand to the Trump golf course at the foot of the Whitestone Bridge. I don't agree with him, Errol, on this politics, but he's not a dummy. And he's not going to invest in something that he didn't know it was a safe bet. And even the royal family of Abu Dhabi is looking at the Bronx, and we'll see if we can get a soccer stadium in the Bronx. Hotel, we have the first world-class hotel, 125-bed Marriott residence inn in the Hutch Metro North, the Hutch Metro Center. So there's a lot of things that are happening in our borough, and unfortunately, people still want to concentrate on the negative images and stereotypes of the 70s, 80s. This is the new Bronx, ladies and gentlemen. Go to ilovethebronx.com and check it out.
It's hard to compete. We do love each other, just so you know. We have a great time together. I always say I don't love all the council members, but I love all the borough presidents. We're a little bit at disadvantage because we have just started, Errol, but I would say some issues that might not be covered are the issue of, you know, we need to build affordable housing in Manhattan and elsewhere. It is the #1 issue. We need to preserve NYCHA, which we all know is always challenged, and we need to preserve and build. So we've got to preserve the affordable housing that we have, including rent regulated, and we need to be sure we build more. We can have a long conversation about how to do that. I think the mom and pop stores are another issue, for at least for Manhattan and maybe part of the other boroughs. We're going to be all chains. Some of you know that I passed a law that my colleagues kindly supported to try to zone for smaller stores, but we're going to lose the mom and pops. I'm a big believer in culturally appropriate quality mental health, be it to support students and families and also coming out of jails, but figuring out how we deal with mental health. I think it's a larger topic. Arts education is an issue in the sense that we have the cultural capital of the world, but it doesn't always make it into the classroom. And I also talked about technology and open data, something that I feel very strongly about. I think that we're also going to have, in Manhattan, we're going to have a district office on 125th Street we're working on that'll be on the street, and it'll be open 7 days a week, and it'll have the kind of constituent work that I know Leroy was talking about that I'm well known for, and I'll never give up on any one individual to try to save their apartment or whatever is necessary. I have tons of interns. I always had 45 on the city council. Now we have more space. We could double it or triple it. And everybody will say, oh, Gail. And I'm delighted that I teach at Hunter College, and I have some students here today. So this is very special for me to have young people involved. So I think in terms of uncovered is what you can do with all this. What the uncovered part is, sometimes you bring together, we're working on South Street Seaport. We're obviously working on the 10-year window for Madison Square Garden. So how do you bring together the stakeholders, the community boards, the citizens, the developers, because, you know, it's a privilege to build. But the question is, how do you involve the community and make something that has, sustainability into the future? And that's what is the challenge, I think. And that's what's the work that's involved to make it sustainable, be it green or just something that we can be proud of for middle class and working families. That's what gets uncovered. People just see the challenges and the problems, but they don't see the work when a product is something that we can be proud of.
Okay, fair enough. In the interest of time for the remaining presidents, one land use project, tell us something that's coming up that we should keep an eye on.
I have four, they're four separate projects, but they're connected. Nearly $1 billion in private investment happening along the waterfront in the North Shore. There's the Iron State project, which is retail and residential. Dave Barry, the folks that brought you the wonderful project in Long Branch, Pier Village, also did the W Hotel in Jersey. It's going to create finally a critical mass of young, bright people who are going to live in that area. Right next door to that is the folks from Triangle building Lighthouse Point, boutique hotel, again, some residential, going to be fabulous. The outlet project, Don Kaposha, VFC, fabulous outlets. I keep telling my fiance it's never going to happen, and I'm going to try to hide it from her as long as possible. And then, of course, the Rich Marin and the folks at the with the wheel, which will be iconic for Staten Island. And very quickly, if you have any money, anyone in this room has any money, you want to invest, Ruben's got a great community, but come to the North Shore of Staten Island. There is a tremendous amount of waterfront property. As you know, they're not making any more land. Come to Staten Island. It is going to transform the North Shore. And as Ruben Diaz very eloquently put, all jokes with Errol aside, it is going to help us change the perception of Staten Island in places outside of Staten Island. So we're really excited about what's happening on the North Shore.
And I think that all the boroughs have stated basically that it's about looking to what the outer boroughs have become, and they have become great places to raise healthy children and families. I look at Sunset Park and what Andrew Kimball, who really did a great job in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Now he has the Sunset Park stretch. I look at our rooftops. We don't have a lot of land anymore, but there's great potential on our rooftops. We have some great rooftop gardens that are taking place, and I'm not talking about just raising a tomato or two. We have real rooftop gardens. We're looking at solar panel industry and how do we do real green technology there. When you look at what we can do in Coney Island, it's not on the drawing board, and many people are not picking up that we're going to look at how do we build that infrastructure. Coney Island can be a top international destination. We're going to do probably our ball drop for the first time in Coney Island to draw people and during New Year's time into the entire parts of Brooklyn. So Brooklyn along the waterfronts, as we have all stated, along the waterfronts, there's some great projects that are taking place there. We have the Domino Sugar Factory that's going to take place in Williamsburg. And then the most important thing that I believe is not really covered is job growth. Brooklyn has become the mecca of new jobs. The freelancers, the tech industry, the tech triangle with NYU, the Navy Yard and the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. It's just amazing how it has become the Simi Valley of New York. And lastly, we need to start ensuring the outer boroughs receive their fair share of hotel tax revenue. all the new hotels that are taking place in Greenpoint and other parts of Brooklyn, in the Bronx, and Staten Island and Queens, yet we receive a small amount of the tourism dollars. We have to do a better job because we want to attract some of those 52 million tourists to visit the entire city. Manhattan is not the only borough anymore. There are 4 more boroughs in New York that need to receive the revenue.
Well, welcome to Queens, I'm going to tell you. Because as you know, you can't get in and out of the city unless you come through Queens. And, you know, we really want to take advantage of that. And one of our themes is that you really haven't visited the entire city until you visited Queens. We have some great restaurants in Queens, but Errol wanted me to talk about things that are not covered. The issue of the Rockaways and the redevelopment in the Rockaways and Howard Beach and the other parts of the Rockaways that need to be redeveloped. We need to highlight that. Our transportation issues as well. You know, we have the 2 airports. We need to finalize a one ride into the airport, but we also need to make sure that we highlight the ability of people from the airport to stop in Jamaica. The redevelopment that's going on in downtown Jamaica, the Flushing area, if you've ever been to Flushing and experienced Flushing, it's a wonderful area for restaurants, for shopping. There are 3 major malls that are being planned for the Flushing area. We have a transportation congestion issue. The 7 train that people are not talking about enough. Right now they're talking about 28 weekends where Queens residents will not be able to take the 7 train, which is a major hub for people to get back and forth because of the improvements they need to make on that. They're not covering that as much. We have a lot of development. We have a lot of waterfront in northern Queens. Howlett's Cove is a new project. Everything that's going on in Long Island City. There's a lot of opportunities in Queens. And I would submit to you that, you know, while the other boroughs are okay, Queens has been voted the friendliest borough for families. So, you know, we want you, and Queens has the happiest homeowners, and we have, you know, we have, they might not, but, you know, we have a lot of opportunities for growth in Queens. We welcome you to come and work with us. Melinda Katz, again, I want to apologize for her not being here, but she's been excited. It's been, she's got a lot of energy. You know, she's keeping us moving. We've been visiting every community board. We're trying to go to every community. I want to end up with the pavilion. Everybody that saw Men in Black, the pavilion needs restoration and saving. That's an iconic figure, an iconic object in this city, the New York State Pavilion, and we want to make sure that that's saved. It's going to cost $14 million if we want to tear it down. So that's $14 million that we have in the bank to start towards restoration. And we can't afford to lose objects like that in our city that are part of our history, that's used by different people for everything from large movies to small events, you know, as a part of the World's Fair, and we need to make sure that we keep our history of the city as well. So we're going to be coming back to all of you for help with the pavilion because we want to make sure that that iconic piece of New York stays a part of New York. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Go to the microphone. Get up. We're now going to turn open for a few questions from the microphone. We have a little bit of time. I invited Sid Davidoff to speak. His firm is a special sponsor of this breakfast, so I asked him if he'd like to give the first question. And Sid Davidoff.
Thank you, Ross. Is it on? First of all, we've had the pleasure of representing the Queens Public Library for the last 20 years or so, so thank you for your kind remarks, and we remember the not-so-kind remarks that were made. A lot of the practitioners in land use are in the room, and one of our frustrations, and I think one of the mistakes the city has made in fostering development, is the pre-certification process. As you know, the ULURP Act was passed with the idea of putting it on a timetable that you know when you start, you know when you get through, and you have your benchmarks. Unfortunately, that's now been the frustration, as I said, and the time constraints have been put in the front of the process on pre-certification. And it doesn't matter whether you're a medium-sized project or a major development on the west side of Manhattan. The expense of it, but more important, the time that you must take from beginning to end. And my question is, how would you what would you do to help foster a new program that would put us on some sort of a timetable to make this a reasonable system?
And I think that's a good point that you raise. There's a timetable on the front end of the process, but on the back end, there is no timetable. By the time you navigate the planning board, by the time you navigate the Department of Building, oftentimes developers are sharing with me, they go in with a plan. If there's one mistake, they have to wait 6 weeks before that one mistake is corrected. Then they have to come back again for another appointment. And then when the mistake again, they have to go back. That needs to stop. We need to fast track and give a realistic timetable on the back end as well as the front end. I have a requirement of how fast I must, get, my part of the ULURP process. We need to also ensure that the planning board and the Department of Building also participate in moving these projects through in a very fast-track manner, and give you, as a business person, you want realistic deadlines and expectations on how long it should take before you get through the back end of the process. And I think that's something that, as all 5 borough presidents, we can look at and see how we sit down with the mayor as he talks about this new development he wants to do in the city, particularly around affordable housing, how we can do a better job of having a user-friendly back end process to development, because right now it does not exist.
Errol, may I just, there's a young lady here, I just want to do a shout out. Hope Cohen is here, who actually did a white paper several years ago about the environmental review process, which is sort of related to this. And basically, if I might summarize, I hope I get it correctly, because it's been a few years. And you have an environmental review process that is implemented at times when it shouldn't. At times when it should, it's not. It mandates that you have all these mitigations, but then it doesn't compel those mitigations. And we tried hard to get the Bloomberg administration to take, we thought it was something that was so consistent with what they were espousing, to take this and really streamline this process. And frankly, in the year 2014, we're not much further along than we started this. But Hope did a fabulous white paper about it. It's a cumbersome process that adds time and money, and no disrespect to the practitioners in the room, it's created a cottage industry for those architects and land use attorneys, but it is killing investment. It just becomes too much of a challenge for people, and they walk away, or it adds a tremendous amount of expense. And if you have the time, I would strongly recommend reading Hope's white paper on it.
Let's go to this side. Please, very short, because everybody wants to hear the borough presidents.
Thank you. Richard Jordan, Royal Academy of Science International Trust, and a native of Flushing, but my question is for Borough President Diaz. Yesterday at Ostos Community College, you outlined some of the innovation going on in the Bronx. When the post office moves out of 149th and Grand Concourse, are you looking at a model such as the Martin Luther King Jr. Central Library in Washington, D.C., which is a traditional library, a knowledge hub, and a place where tech training goes on? Are you looking at a model like that for that building?
Yes. That and many others. Just to bring everyone up to speed, the General Post Office in the Bronx on 149th Street and Grand Concourse is being sold by the Postal Service. It's a beautiful, magnificent building. It's 3 stories, 3.5 stories. There's like an inset floor on the top, and that whole southern strip of Grand Concourse, we upzone, and we know that this could be, potentially the next Dumbo in New York City. And what we don't want to see is for the sale to go just to the highest bidder. The building, the way that it is now, is ripe for, say, a storage company to come in. And I will crazy glue myself to the door before I will allow that to happen. So what we want is having conversations with the community. We want to examine cultural institutions, maybe a mini market. I know that the developers like Young Woo who have been interested, perhaps doing some pedagogical or academic component to it, where we can marry, say, Ostos Community College, which is right across the street, something that will augment and be an added amenity where we can continue to have the community go into that building and not lock them out. So we're going to be looking at this very closely. We're sad that the attempts by Congress to stop the sale were futile and did not come to fruition. But nonetheless, as we move forward, while we didn't want the post office to be sold, we're going to monitor this very closely.
On this side.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Nagel, and I represent bricklayers and unionized tile setters in New York City, about 4,000 of them who live in the 5 boroughs. And my question is, we've been talking extensively about the development and the development process, and I want to sort of turn the attention to the jobs that are created in the development process and what kind of things we can do to ensure that those are better quality jobs. The last 12 years has not been good to the construction workforce in the city. We've seen an enormous diversion of what were traditionally middle-class jobs to essentially poverty wage jobs. We can talk about HPD, where they claim to have created 150,000 jobs. If 10% of those were union jobs, that would probably be excessive. And we can see that based on the track record of the last 4 or 5 years of Eric Schneiderman prosecuting contractor after contractor after contractor who's failed to pay wages, failed to pay overtime. So what my question is for you is, in your role as borough president, how do you plan on involving labor in the development process? Thank you.
I know there's an ongoing discussion about affordable housing and labor, unionized labor or not, and it's an ongoing discussion. Actually, in the last couple of days, I've met with quite a few, to be honest with you, affordable housing developers who use unionized labor. And they say that it is positive in the sense that it gets a better product. It's safer, there are less change orders, and they feel that the buildings that they're building have longer lives and are more sustainable. That's a controversial topic. I think that it's my experience, having talked to many people in labor, that working with the unions and affordable housing is a situation in which the unions will work to figure out a way, because it is a product that is good for their members and good for the city as a whole in terms of building middle-class values and families. And I noticed that today some of the folks in the state senate are talking about Mitchell-Lama housing, which, maybe it's a pipe dream, but we're all interested in figuring out how to have that kind of rejuvenation of that kind of housing, and that was built with unionized labor. So I'm one of those, I would like to work on that challenge. God knows we need the affordable housing, and the quality of your members' work is what we need. So how do we marry the two is something that I would like to work on.
Again, on this side, but again, short, please.
Yes, Michael White, Citizens Defending Libraries. Democracy, equality, that's what libraries are all about. That's why I think it was great to hear about the planned expansion of libraries in Queens. However, we know that during the Bloomberg administration, there was a deliberate underfunding of libraries, particularly at the end when he got into his 3rd term. And then that underfunding was cited as a reason to use a self-cannibalizing program of selling off and shrinking libraries to fund them. I'm wondering, since we have all the borough presidents here together, if they see an opportunity to coordinate, and Eric Adams has been working with us to address what was going on during the Bloomberg years. There was talk about looking into the transparency of the boards in Queens, the 140,000 for the deck in Queens that's being investigated is a fairly small ticket item compared to the 150 million of the Central Library Plan and the Queens and the Donnell debacle that was never investigated.
Two quick things. One, we need to move the library budget out of the cultural affairs. It needs to be part of the educational budget. Libraries are not a luxury, it's a necessity, particularly when you look at a borough like Brooklyn, where the technology, the broadband built out is not there, and so we need to really deal with how we are funding our libraries. Two, we need to look at the real estate that is next to libraries, like this Pacific Branch on 4th Avenue. It has air rights. You don't have to tear down that beautiful branch. You can sell those air rights to the developer next door, allow him to build, allow him to renovate that library. We have a real capital issue of funders in libraries because we have underfunded libraries for years. and they're in the wrong area. Libraries needs to be part of the multi-billion-dollar educational budget. This way it will receive its proper funding that it deserves.
I'm a big supporter of the libraries. We have hundreds of branches, obviously, and the question in Manhattan and the Bronx and Staten Island, which is New York Public Library, there's a very controversial proposal, as we all know, about the research libraries and the books, and oh my goodness. So I think the libraries need, the branches in particular need support, and I know that we will all work on that. It's an ongoing issue, but the library should be open 7 days a week and should be funded.
Good morning. I am Michael Feiner, president of the Bayside Hill Civic Association. It's nice to see the five of you appear to be on the same page. It's great to see. My question involves one of the most bizarre and most illogical experiences in all my years in local civics, and that is in dealing with the Board of Standards and Appeals, where we could see locations, there's no way the variance should not have been granted, and we go to the Board of Standards of Appeals with an army of most articulate speakers in all of Northeast Queens, and we lose 5-0, totally unanimous against our desires and plain logic. What is your future plans in dealing with the Board of Standards of Appeals, Leroy, and perhaps Eric?
Well, I can tell you, as land use chair former, and as Melinda Katz, the former land use chair, the Board of Standards and Appeals is an agency that we will have to go to together with the community groups. Hopefully, the community groups will come to the Borough President's office and articulate their needs. We will work with you in addressing those specific concerns to make sure that when you go to the Board of Standards and Appeals, you can have a full, cogent, and clear explanation of how you feel about those issues. I can tell you that specifically in my district, I had two issues that took me 9 years to deal with the Board of Standards and Appeals, because I made sure that I went and either had a letter or I appeared when I could to the Board of Standards and Appeals to let them know that the situation in the particular community was not fair to the community. And unfortunately, until we can get the charter to change the Board of Standards and Appeals, that's going to have to be the way that the borough presidents do it. Working with those communities, making sure that we understand the issues, making sure that we articulate to the Board of Standards and Appeals exactly what it is. We each appoint a member, I think, to the Board of Standards and Appeals, and we can make sure that that member articulates our point of view as well.
We have 4 people standing. Those will be the last questions, and then so please keep it short.
Hi, I'm Mary Habstert with the Historic Ships Coalition, and specifically with New York's only historic steamship, which just a few blocks from here at Pier 25, the Lilac. We've had a problem with how piers have been redeveloped in the city. We've lost maritime uses. There are not enough berths for ships that would like to bring historic, cultural, and educational programs to our waterfronts. How would you involve mariners in waterfront development and make sure that we have maritime uses at the piers as we go forward?
You and I should talk, because I have a waterfront that, you know,
Pier 1,
we
some cleats and bollards up.
alrighty. We know as Staten Island there's all the disadvantages of being an island, but we haven't fully exploited the advantages of the waterfront, and that's access to the waterfront, recreational, and transportation. I have a situation right now as a result of Sandy where there are various remnants of piers that there are issues as to ownership. But I want to open up our waterfront. I want to take full advantage of it. I absolutely would love to have a conversation with you and see what we can do.
I am also exploring how we take better advantage of our waterfront. If you look on the west side of the Bronx and you walk up on the High Bridge, it's unfortunate how if you look at the Manhattan side, it looks great. You look at the Bronx side, it leaves a lot to be desired. And so we are putting a lot of Reso 8 money on our waterfronts in the Soundview section of the Bronx. There's a discussion now for us to fund a dock for ferry service as well as an eco dock. There's been conversations on that. And so hopefully with this new administration, we get that bump, that increase in Reso 8 money so that we could do it all. But certainly we'll be talking to the administration, and there are a lot of different organizations like Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice. We have the Bronx River Alliance in our borough. There's so many different active organizations that are promoting waterfront usage, and we're certainly partnering up with them.
And when we look at what we're doing and what we have done at Brooklyn Battery Park, as well as we were able to extend the ferry service that came out of Rockaway and now part of our transportation system, now that we are not going to be able to have the capital dollars to build new subway stations, but we can better utilize our waterfront. The challenge is how do we take people from the piers to inland? And I think that we can utilize new forms of ferry service as we continue to expand the daily commute, as well as the recreational aspects of our waterfront. People are reintroducing themselves to the waterfront in Brooklyn and all of our boroughs, and we need to play a major role to ensure that that continues to happen.
The South Street Seaport has lots of ships that need lots of capital money, and the museum, and I'm going to be working to put together a task force to figure out how that port should look like Old New York and not a fancy new glass tall building. That's been very blunt and very controversial. But the issue is, generally, I think we all share the need to try to figure out, there are lots of good programs, I hate to say some even in the Bronx, that have wonderful opportunities, but also lots of New York Restoration, which Bette Midler has initiated. There are lots of programs like that need to be initiated and supported.
Okay, on this side now.
Okay, good morning. My name is Yolanda Belcher, Sustainable Flatbush, Brooklyn. Okay, my question is concerning surveys that show a large majority of people who vote don't know the public officials, where they can be contacted, and the kinds of legislation that they support. So I'm wondering what kind of progressive programs can be implemented in the community to accomplish that, and if in fact that you serve on any New York State standing committees.
Yes, we've under my predecessor had and current councilperson Carlo Macheco was put in place a major apparatus on how to deal with this Sandy recovery aspect in Brooklyn. Report was just released, I believe, last week, and we're going to continue to monitor those areas. To answer your question specifically around civic engagement, I think we do an awful job in civic engagement. The public stop me often and say, please don't be like every other elected official, and I say to them, don't be like every other citizen. Citizens must be engaged. This is a marriage. It's not about, I was not elected to the position of Jesus Christ. I'm not going to walk on water or part water. We're in this together. If I fail, then you fail. We need to be a partnership, and together we'll come up with solutions and try again. And until we compel the public to understand that we too sit down at the kitchen table and try to figure out if we could pay for college tuition. My heart drops when I pump gas and see the high cost of the gasoline. And I don't get a discount. No one says, Eric Adams, you're the borough president, so we're going to charge you less. We're in this together, and the public must be engaged to participate in the process and become knowledgeable around the issues. And that's why in my borough presidency, I'm going to ensure that we do a substantial civic engagement to come out with the Sims model, and educated consumer is our best customer.
One of the things that I do without any fanfare, I like to go into classrooms and teach state government, local politics, with the hopes that we get the students at every level to look at elected officials and what we do and get excited about it. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we try. All the elected officials try. We all have Facebook pages. We all Twitter. We send out mailings. But it's not sexy to read or to look up your elected official. Everybody knows what Beyonce's wearing and the latest Jay-Z song. But when it comes to us, that's what we're competing against. And then we need to do bigger things, like, for instance, make sure that we have one thing you should all understand. While we are on the same page as it was said before, we don't always agree on everything. So because one borough president says something, it doesn't mean that we all agree 100%. So what I'm about to say is, don't take it as if this is their position. But we should have same-day election, registration, so that people on election day, people should be able to go out there and register to vote and vote. Maybe give the day off on election days. And so that people can go out there and know that the reason why you have off. Have parents go and, this is what we've been trying to promote, have parents go out and take their kids. I did that with my 2 sons. Believe it or not, I'm an empty nester, Hilda and I. But all through our years, our young boys, and now they're voting, they're both in college, all through their years, we took them with us to the voting booth. So we're trying to do our job, but like Eric said, the community has to do theirs as well.
I would say a couple of things. The issue, we all agree, I think, on their early voting and the ability to same-day registration. But, and 24% of those registered voted in the last election, which is terrible. So we need to change that, and there are bills in Albany that are stuck and need to move to get a voting process that is 2014 and not something from the 18th century like some states do what we should be doing. But in addition, I know we passed a bill, this is on the tech front, but every city agency that has a board or commission, the bill that I passed in the city council, they must be webcast by the month of March, which is quite soon. And we're going to do the same thing for our borough boards. They will all be webcast and they will be available so people know at least somewhat what government is doing. People have no clue generally what different offices do, and that's because it's hard. On the other hand, we all need to be on the street talking to people, subways and buses, and not be hidden somewhere in an office.
May I just add 30 seconds to that? How about we reintroduce civics into the curriculum? We essentially have gutted social studies. I remember being a 5th grader and a 6th grader, and Mrs. Joseph was my teacher, and on twice a month on Thursdays, there would be a team, 2 teams, and you would compete on current events. And I am a competitive guy. And I get the sense that some of my colleagues are competitive too. And I wanted to win that. Getting the newspaper in my house, still with my father, Staten Island Advance, was an event when the newspaper arrived. We broke the rule. We had the television on when we were eating, but it was the news. Let's reintroduce civics. And I have to tell you real quickly, one of the interesting things I learned from the paid sick leave battle was just how, and this might piss some people off, but how politically illiterate some of the business people were. They didn't know the difference between the city council and a hole in the wall. And the 5 chambers came together for the first time, with all due respect, Gail, because of that bill. And it was shocking to me. And I walked away and I would say to my staff, like, how do you expect to win a fight when you don't know? The other side knows how to find City Hall. The other side knows how to get press attention. The other side knows how to organize. And you folks don't know who your 2 state senators are. There's a political illiteracy across the board. It starts by getting and inculcating our kids and getting them interested in civic events and getting them to know the great things that these folks are doing and getting an interest in your own community. And Staten Island, it's like until the issue lands in their front yard, they don't want to be involved. And we have a daily newspaper, which is the Cliff Notes version of life in our borough. And it is a source, whomever asked that question, thank you. It is a source of great frustration for those of us who are passionate about public service. And Eric said it best, give us an educated voter, give us an educated constituent, and if they disagree with us, fine, but at least you can have an intelligent conversation, not them saying, well, what are you doing about X, Y, and Z, and you just spent the last 10 months working on X, Y, and Z.
Okay, on this side, those of you regular attenders know we're going a little over time, but this is an important event, and we appreciate your staying. Yes.
Thank you so much for everything you all said about the libraries, and I'm just going to add to that point. As some of you know, we started a petition, and we have over 16,000 petition signers to protect the libraries from being sold off and shrunk. And in addition to the funding issue, we're also concerned about the mindset of the leadership, that there's a disconnect between the mindset of the trustees and the leadership of the NYPL, the BPL, and the users and the librarians, and that has to be bridged somehow, because the selling off and shrinkage of the libraries and getting rid of books from libraries, if anybody's noticed, there are empty bookshelves on lots and lots of libraries right now, is not what the communities want, and the voices of the community needs to be heard. I've met with hundreds and thousands of library users coming in and out of the libraries, and I can tell you what they're saying, and I'm hopeful that Eric, if you're going to be having a task force on this, that we will be invited, and the other groups that have been fighting to preserve the libraries and the communities who use them will also be having a seat at the table. Thank you.
And we did in the, I would love for you to participate in the task force we're putting together. Just three quick things. One, we have a real capital issue with our libraries, and I'm talking about particularly those that were part of the Carnegie branches. They're beautiful, pristine buildings. To replace the roofs, many of them are landmark. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to deal with the real capital issue that we have. Second, the library system must move into the next stage. I am moving towards that to have the first textbook list school in my district. We need to realize that, yes, it's nice to hold a book in your hand, but there's this thing called a Nook, iPad, and other technology, and we need to introduce people into the new technology. Third, the library must become more than just this place where you say, shh, no talking. It must become the focal point in the community. We must do things like passports, teach people how to be ready for gainful employment, a place where various cultures can learn second languages. So I want to move the library system in Brooklyn into the new generations of libraries. There was a commercial that used to say, this is not your dad's Oldsmobile, the new Oldsmobile, but this is not our dad's library system, and the needs of what people need from the library has changed. And so we can't merely romanticize the love of having this structure. That structure must be applicable to the needs of the people of the borough, and that's the role I must play as borough president. It's a great system. It's needed. You have my full support, but I am very aware that there are a lot of assets, particularly, as I stated earlier, the air rights that libraries currently possess. I don't believe they should only be used next door across the street if it's a landmark building. It should be able to be used anywhere in that community. We have to change our thinking about how we use air rights and how do we go about making sure our libraries are ready for the future.
Thank you.
Last question.
Oh, I've got the last word. I'm David Gruber. I'm chair of Community Board 2 in Manhattan, which covers the West Village, Soho, and parts of Chinatown. Excellent forum, I must say. I'm wondering if we could start a conversation about a very, very limited retail rent stabilization program for small businesses, maybe stores under 800 or 1,000 square feet, because they are really the fabric of communities. They provide essentialist services, and they're being forced out. These small businesses can no longer afford the rents. They're taken over, at least in my neighborhood, by eating and drinking establishments, I'm sure in other boroughs as well, by small corporate outlets, corporate flags that are really advertising, you know, their larger businesses. And maybe we could start that conversation. I'm very sympathetic to landlords and market forces and the need to have income. And so maybe it's coupled with a tax abatement. But I think we ought to start thinking about a retail rent stabilization for smaller mom-and-pop type stores and businesses.
David, thank you. You know, in the West Side, we passed a zoning ordinance that states that they have to be banks only 25 feet long and a larger store only 40 feet long and a 200 long streetscape. But I think we need a larger discussion. Any tax abatement has to go to Albany. Tried that already, got stuck. So I think it's a very important issue, particularly for Manhattan. The other boroughs, to be honest with you, don't have as much of a challenge, because I asked every single one of my 51 colleagues, is this a problem? And it was primarily in Manhattan, because we have the chain stores. I hate to say this, but if I see one more 7-Eleven, I'm going to throw up. Thank you.
If I see one more Marc Jacobs store on Bleecker Street, I'm going to be there with you.
We've already started a small business task force, and I would invite any Queens businesses to want to come and be part of the task force. We're looking for incubator space. We've already identified a couple of buildings in Long Island City to do startup space for small businesses that want to start up and go anywhere from a desk to 1,000 square feet. And we're looking for other opportunities to partner with people that have property that are looking to swing that space. Also, we're looking in Long Island City to establish a tech corridor to take advantage of the Columbia facility that's coming into Roosevelt Field, and Cornell, sorry, I didn't have coffee, I just had water this morning. Cornell, thank you, Gail. And we're looking to do a tech corridor in Long Island City, and part of that is to create entrepreneurship opportunities. So please come and join our Small Business Task Force in Queens if you're interested. Even if you don't live in Queens, you have a business in Queens, we really want to get your input. We had one meeting already. We'll be looking to do that task force on a regular basis.
This isn't an answer to the question, but I have to get it in. I have my transcript here, and it says that in the fall of 1990, I got a C+ in evidence. I want to know, is the statute of limitations over? Where do I get to object to this? C+ in evidence?
You can talk to
Dean?
me afterwards.
To answer your question, I think that we're looking to do, we need to redefine the termination of small business. We need to look at freelancers. We need to also look at accelerator programs, and as Leroy stated about the incubators, I think the definition of small businesses have changed. And the large manufacturers, we have a lot of small startups in our borough, and we must be user-friendly to that. But this is the empire state. We must get back in the business of building empires, and government has no business being in your business. We need to build small business into large business, and I'm not a supporter in telling property owners how to utilize their space. I believe that this is an open market. That's the beauty of America. You should have the opportunity to decide how you're going to use their space. Government space we control. Private space is up to, I believe, the private individuals to ensure to get the best bang for their buck. This is a capitalist country. I support it. I embrace it. I believe in capitalism. I'm a capitalist.
Well, I want to thank Errol Lewis for moderating and for the 5 borough presidents. This has been an extraordinary event for New York Law School. We're very proud to have sponsored it, and we thank you all for participating and staying. Thank you all. For each of the borough presidents, as we always do, we give a product of the scholarship of this law school. We have a Laura Uke for them. Thank you all. We'll see you at the next breakfast.